I assume you will agree with me that withholding disaster relief by President Trump or any other chief executive of the United States is a violation of his duty and of law.
Well, Senator, leadership has consequences, and looking at the tragedy that's happening in California,
I want to ask you yes or no, with all due respect. It's an easy.
What's happening in California is the ramification of many decisions over many years. But under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, there will be no political bias to how disaster relief is delivered to the American people.
So if President Trump were to say to you, we're going to withhold money from Connecticut or Michigan or any of the states, Iowa, because we don't like the governor or we don't like the politics of the state, you would stand up to him and say, Mr. President, we need to allocate that money.
Well, Senator, in 3 days, President Trump will take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law in this country, and he will do that, and I'll be glad to have him back.
And I don't speak
to hypotheticals, which is what you're asking me to do, but what I will tell you is that as Secretary, I will do the same. I will deliver the programs as the
Well, it's
laws
more than a
dictate.
hypothetical, with all due respect, and I apologize for interrupting you, but my time is limited, as you know, as a veteran of these hearings. It's more than a hypothetical. It's based on experience with President Trump withholding money from Washington State and elsewhere. I need to know from you, will you stand up to the President and say, no, the Constitution and the Impoundment Act requires us, for example, to allocate the $100 billion that we have just appropriated in the last session to states like Connecticut, $3 million, Texas, $10 million, almost every one of the states represented here. Will you say no to the President if he withholds that money?
Sir, I don't know about the scenarios that you're referencing with President Trump, but what I will tell you is that if given the chance to be Secretary of Homeland Security, that I will deliver the programs according to the law and that it will be done with no political bias. And if the programs change or if you decide to change the rule of law, then I will follow that while adhering to the Constitution.
So you pledge to allocate and distribute that $100 billion
according to how the program is written, with no political bias. Every American deserves to be there and have disaster relief the same as their neighbors.
What can you do in your new role to try and start reducing over time the moral hazard that we have created in this country with federal disaster relief?
Well, Senator, emergencies and disasters are always locally led. They're led by the local communities and leaders, and that's because they're much more responsive and much better informed on how to bring relief and to get those emergency services there to meet the need. Then it's state supported and federally resourced. Which means that when we come in, that we're supporting what the mission is, what those emergency operations and plans are that the local city and county and then also the state has implemented and do what we can to fulfill the mission of our programs. One of the things that FEMA's not doing today that I think we should be doing is streamlining communications. We saw this in New Orleans. We saw it in other terrorist attacks in the country, and you just referenced it as well about the American people not getting the truth, senators not getting the truth and the transparency that we need, is that I believe FEMA can always put out a blueprint for what a response would be should something terrible happen. And when we look at the Secret Service, what happened in Butler, we saw that communication was an issue, that the Secret Service wasn't communicating and balls were getting dropped with local authorities, local law enforcement, and we can put forward a blueprint for how communication can happen and be streamlined between the federal government, the state, and the local entities, so that should something happen, this is how we talk to each other, to make sure that the public has the facts, they're not getting misinformation, which happened with the New Orleans terror attack just recently, but also up in Pennsylvania as well. That blueprint is what we do at the state level that FEMA has failed to do, to proactively educate the public on what everybody's roles are, what we do should something happen, whether it be a natural disaster or a terrorist attack or an emergency response is needed, that we can put out those blueprints ahead of time, educate people, train those local entities, which They currently do to a certain extent today, but not good enough to really know that not only can the resources be pre-deployed in many of these situations so that they're more readily accessible, but also how are we going to communicate and make sure everybody's on the same page so that we can be much more efficient. I wish that we would have had different leadership and a different governor in California, or we might have a different result there. But in the Department of Homeland Security, we can do all that we can to make sure that the people that live in California know that they're going to get a response from the federal government that's appropriate, and we did all that we could to make sure that they had the information ahead of time so they could protect themselves when they do have a failure in leadership like we've seen.
The phone app that I've called Concierge Service for Illegal Immigrants, I'm sure you're familiar with it. This was the Biden administration's effort to allow asylum seekers to apply ahead of time using their phones, but not actually to provide any evidence that they needed asylum. There was a newspaper report, a press report that said the only problem with the app is it never asks users, are you seeking asylum? They don't ask for any asylum evidence. They simply release these so-called asylum seekers who use the app into the country on parole. Sometimes they're never given a hearing. The Inspector General actually did a report, a full investigation report on CBP One, and found that frequently users of this app were claiming the same addresses in the United States as their intended destination, even though they didn't know each other, they weren't family connections. In other words, it has been completely abused. And the idea that the federal government would pay for this kind of concierge service for illegals, I think, is outrageous. Will you end the use of the CBP One app?
Yes, Senator, if confirmed, and I have the opportunity to be secretary on day one, CBP One will be shut down. There's data and information in there that we will preserve so that we can ensure we know who's coming into this country and who's already here that we need to go find, but also we make sure that there's another program, CHNV, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where our federal government actually paid to fly people into this country directly from other countries without any vetting or knowing who they are. So there's several of these programs that need to be eliminated, and we need to ensure that we're following legal immigration law.
The present administration, soon to be gone, has granted mass parole in direct defiance of the law, not case-by-case evaluation. The CHNV program is one of those instances. Will you put a stop to this abuse of our parole law and our asylum system?
Yes, we will go back to case-by-case evaluation of these parole cases and ensure that we have more resources if you will partner with us to make sure that our legal immigration system is fully utilized, that we have more judges, more immigration courts so that we can process people legally and make sure that they are going through that process rather than like Joe Biden has done, use this as an excuse to allow people to come into our country with no consequence.
The kids who were victims of this policy and who still are not big back with their parents. I hope that you will support that kind of effort.
Senator, the Trump administration never had a family separation policy. They had a zero tolerance policy, which said that our laws would be followed. What I'm alarmed by is the over 300,000 children that went missing during the Biden administration. And when we talk about children and what they're potentially facing as far as victimization in this country and the trafficking that's going on, this administration's lack of desire to find out where those children are or what they may be going through is alarming to me. So I want to stop that.
Because my time is expiring, I'm just going to interrupt again with apologies to say, let's put aside.
Well, I can't put aside 340,000 children.
Let's put aside what happened in the past. There are still 1,000 children who are separated and waiting to be reunited. I'd like your commitment that you're going to continue the effort to reunite them with their parents.
Senator, keeping families together is critically important to me and to this country. I'm concerned about Laken Riley's family, that they no longer have her. I'm concerned about the fact that we have people in this country that don't know where their children are, or people in other countries who sent their children here and they've been lost by this administration. So yes, my focus will be to keep families together. We will uphold our law and we'll make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our children safe from the trafficking and the drug epidemic that's hit this country.
Will you pledge to us that you will open the books on all of the facts associated and around these assassination attempts, that you will make available to us and to the public, most importantly, all the facts so that we can ensure that this never happens again and that the needed reforms in the Secret Service are put into effect?
Yeah, Senator, if I am the Secretary of Homeland Security, I will certainly work with you to build transparency and make sure the facts are shared with you and your committee. I know that you've been very frustrated by the lack of transparency from the department, and I want to thank those of you that have worked on that report that was put together on these assassination attempts. I know it was a bipartisan report and investigation that this committee conducted, and I appreciate you focusing on that, and I will work with you to get the information so that you have the truth of really what happened there and the failures so they can be fixed. Is that people don't trust the federal government. They don't trust our leadership and this current administration that's in the White House right now to tell them the truth. To tell them the truth about what the threats really are, about our agencies and departments, when there are failures, addressing them and fixing it. The Secret Service is one of those perfect examples. They need leadership that understands why that Secret Service was created and what it needs to do. There's two elements really that the Secret Service is tasked with, and that is protective detail and then also investigations. Yet we see investigators within the Secret Service out there investigating antiquities and other things that are off mission when they should be focused on making sure we're addressing national security events with the protocols that are necessary and protecting the individuals that they're charged with and getting that skill set and training that are necessary. That's been compromised by not having enough people there and being adequately staffed and resourced. But frankly, the leadership hasn't been honest about talking about it. We saw this with the drones over New Jersey as well, the federal government not answering the questions from the public. And when they finally got a straight answer out of President Trump, they felt reassured that somebody recognized that this was something they were questioning and that they deserved answers. My goal and my mission is to build trust. We will undertake a large job and a large duty that we have to fulfill, that the American people expect us to do by securing our border, to make sure that our nation is a nation with borders or we're no nation at all, and that we are making sure that those criminal actors that are perpetuating violence in our communities and in our cities and towns and states are removed from this country, that there's consequences for breaking the law in our country again. There has to be consequences because when Americans break the law, there's consequences. And why would we ever allow someone to come in from another country and not allow them and not have consequences or allow them to continue to go forward and to commit rape and murders and break other laws that endanger our society. So we've had over 13,000 murders that are loose in this country that have come over that border. We've had almost 16,000 rapists and sexual assault perpetuators that are loose in this country right now. 425,000 plus people have criminal convictions that are here illegally in this country that our current administration is doing nothing to round them up and get them out of our country. We will be doing that immediately, and that will be the priority. And that is one of the reasons that today the American people have lost their trust. President Trump will build it back and know that their federal government is accountable to them and is working to put America first again. The Secret Service is in need of dramatic reforms. They do have a protective detail element that is their priority, and also an investigation side. My understanding is that that investigation side is often used to train the protective detailed officers, but clearly they are not focusing on what their true duty is, and it needs to get back onto what they were created for, and that was the protective detail mission and emergency.
I also want to ask you about domestic terrorism events. Unrelated to groups outside our borders, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism in this country. It has spiked beyond any prediction.
Yeah.
And I want to know of your concern with anti-Semitist, racist events, Charlottesville, Buffalo, Pittsburgh. There's a shorthand for these violent terrorist acts against people in the United States.
Yes, Senator, I'm very concerned about what we've seen in this country as far as anti-Semitic violence that has happened. In fact, last year during our legislative session, I brought legislation to more clearly define it so that we could fight it in our home state. And I'm hopeful I can work with you to continue to do what we can to make sure that we are addressing this rising threat and not facilitating it in this country.
And I just want to make sure that when you say we're protecting Americans against terrorism, that we're protecting all Americans, including people in mosques, in churches, in synagogues, people regardless of their worship, their race, their background. We need to protect all Americans from anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia. I hope you'll commit to that effort.
Yes, correct. Thank you, Senator, and I look forward to working with you to do that.
It's absolutely essential that we address this threat. What we're seeing around the world and what we're seeing in daily activities should be a concern. I think this is just a matter of time. It's not if, it's when, and we need to be on the front end of that. And with that in mind, I want to remind folks that Congress just recently extended critical counter UAS authority, counter drone authority, only for a short time basis for the 12th time. We only do these little tiny short-term extensions, and we aren't dealing with the problem comprehensively as we should. And those are going to expire on March 14th, a very short time from now. And so my question for you, Governor, is if confirmed as DH Secretary, will you commit to working with me and my colleagues to pass durable, long-term authorities that will protect this country from what is a real threat and it's just a matter of time? And I don't want to have a horrible incident occur and people wonder why we didn't take action beforehand. So please address that.
Senator, I look forward to working with you in this committee to address the threats we may face and the usage of drones in this country and in relation to our national security interests and our homeland security interests. So thank you for bringing up the conversation today, because it is one of the areas within DHS that we have a responsibility to address in cooperation with Congress.
We just found out that the Treasury Department had a cyber attack on December 8th from China. And no surprise here, they access servers through work from home software. So it all ties together. We need more people back in the offices, making sure that any communications are secured, any work is secured. And to that, I know the Biden administration has put a huge emphasis on the cyber bureaucracy, but they haven't really done anything about it. And they haven't given any authority to those that are enforcing the standards. So we need to enforce the standards that are set forth to make sure the cybersecurity is truly there. But what can DHS do? One, with telework, how do we get the employees back? And then two, how do we make sure that our systems are secure from these cyber attacks?
Well, Senator, thank you for focusing on remote work and the need to get people back in their offices and accountable to the work that they do. In fact, I've heard since being nominated for this position that many of the agencies within the department are not showing up, they're not doing their jobs. But even FEMA, who is responsible for disaster response, that they have the alternative, some of these employees, to not even respond to a disaster, which might explain the horrific results that we saw in North Carolina when they had such a terrible disaster that impacted families and communities, and FEMA failed them so miserably. If it's not even a responsibility of them to show up when terrible things happen, what other day-to-day activities are not getting done because they're working for home or not doing their job at all. You talked about cybersecurity and the need to ensure that our systems are safe and secure. One of the things that disturbs me the most is that we don't necessarily even know how some of these espionage attacks that have infiltrated our systems have happened. We don't know how to stop them yet. We don't have the knowledge, and that our departments and intelligence agencies and cybersecurity agencies have become siloed and aren't working together to stay in front of these bad actors. But many times our most vulnerable area happens at the state and local level. Some of these smaller entities that feed information into our systems is where they choose to infiltrate and get our data and to really hold for ransom many of these companies and then impact our federal systems as well. So one of the first meetings I had when I was elected governor with the former governor during the transition was he said the number one priority you're going to have as governor is to secure our systems. He said our systems are so antiquated and we've had over 16,000 hacking attempts in just the last month. You need to secure our systems to get it done. So that was a priority for me and to do that, and we fully funded it and got it done in South Dakota, and it's being implemented today. I look forward to doing that at the federal level to make sure that people's data and information is safe, but also our country is safe from these bad actors that have a plan to take us out.